Welcome to Folk Tales. I'm Dominic Zammit, Director at Boatfolk, and throughout this series I'll be joined by a wealth of guests from the UK's boating community who will be sharing their stories of lives spent in, on or by the water. This is a podcast by Boatfolk for Boatfolk. Today I'm joined by Peter Bell, a Leamington-based boater and author. You may know Peter for his widely published boating adventures aboard his Southerly 42 RST Dofesaba II. Peter, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
Oh, thanks for asking me. It's very nice of you.
You're very welcome. I mean, we've got a whole load of things we want to talk to you about, Peter, but first things first, tell us about the latest book. It obviously launched at the end of January this year. What adventures will we be reading about?
Well, it's basically a coming together of two books, one from 2019, which I've called Down the Punic Coast, because that's where the Carthaginians had their civilization, and 2020, which is the COVID year. And they're all together in a book called The Adventures of Dofesaba II, 2019 and 2020.
Fantastic.
And basically, it tells you all about what we did in those 2 years and tries to encourage you to go cruising in that area, because it's very rare people cruise that part of the Mediterranean, because they're usually coming through Gibraltar and want to go straight to Sicily and then Italy and then Croatia, and they always miss out these really wonderful parts of the coast, which just has so much history and so much to see and do, and some beautiful places, absolutely beautiful.
So what attracted you there in the first place, Peter? What made you sort of go for the uncharted route?
When we first had the boat built, there was a throwaway line by the salesman who said, "Oh, and of course, because it's a swing keel yacht, you can go down the Canal du Midi." And I thought, that's quite a good idea.
Don't mind if I do.
Yes, why not? And so it had always been a plan for many a long year. And in 2018, we went down the Canal du Midi and ended up at the Mediterranean end of it, after many, many adventures, I can assure you. And of course, during that particular year, it was very hot in southern France. And we were intending to go up the coast to Marseille and around there, and then on to Italy, etc., etc. And my wife suddenly got very ill. We found out that she really doesn't like the heat and was becoming physically sick when it got over 30 degrees. So one had to make a complete reverse ferret and find a way of not taking her into very hot water. So the only thing I could suggest was we turned right instead of left and started making our way back to England or North Brittany or anywhere like that where it was a lot cooler. So I was trying to be nice to my good lady wife.
That's very chivalrous of you. And so obviously you started out in 2018 in France, and you made your way through the Canals du Midi. Any sort of major hairy moments along the way other than vomiting wives?
You mean down the canals? Oh, yes. We had some amazing adventures. The best one, or the worst one, if you like, was when we were pootling down the canal, where you've got an 8-kilometre. It's around that speed. It's very slow. And basically, on the first part of the canal, there's just no one. It's completely empty and it's gorgeous. I mean, the trees come over like this, over making a canopy, and the sun dapples through the water, and you're pootling along in the middle of a canal. And all of a sudden, part of my brain suddenly went, hang on, there's something wrong. Oh. And what had happened, there was no water going through the engine. And if there's no water going through the engine, there's no cooling. And we didn't have there was nobody around. We're in this middle of this big agricultural area with nothing. And we would never have been able to get away. So we stopped, and I had to go and investigate down in the bowels of the boat. And 33 degrees it was that day. And it was, oh gosh. But I remembered what my old friend Tom Cunliffe said. And he said, if you've got a blockage in your inlet pipe, you blow through it.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, I know. Yeah. So I had to get down there and disconnect all the pipes and everything and try to blow through it because, you can't really puff that much. But fortunately, I have an air pump on board and we managed to clear the blockage and we went on our way. So I've personally thanked Mr. Cunliffe and said, without you, we'd still be stuck in France, stuck in a field in France.
Worst places to be stuck, though, I suppose.
Well, that's right. But there wasn't a bar available, so unfortunately. But yes, I mean, we had many, many adventures. And that was the first book I wrote, which was Dofesaba II 2018, funnily enough.
Very good. And I think we get a good sense of your sort of the way that you tell these stories. I mean, do you think you've got a sort of particular style of writing that you could categorize?
Well, my first book's been out for a year now, and I've got some feedback on that. And most people say it's like you're in the room talking to us.
Fantastic.
Or down the pub with a beer in your hand talking to us and telling us about the stories. And many yachting boat books are, quite sterile and quite formal. We took off at 210 hours and we went on a course of 32.5 degrees and the wind was blowing 12 knots from the west-southwest, etc.
Yeah.
I don't do that, I'm afraid. I'm a lot more interested in making you laugh or smile and making you feel that you're enjoying the adventure with us.
Fantastic. That's very good to hear. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners will be looking for some light relief after the year we've just had. So
it is. The 2019 part was not built for that because we didn't know anything about COVID in those days.
No,
but the 2020 part is definitely trying to lighten one's mood, allow people to have an adventure while sitting in their armchair, while the weather was cold and rainy and horrible, so that you could read it and be in southern Spain.
Fantastic. And obviously in the second book, you, as you say, you're in southern Spain. What made you choose Spain for next adventure?
Well, basically, we were down the end of the Canal du Midi and we had to turn right because we had to get home because my wife couldn't handle the hot weather that we were going to have if we'd gone left towards Marseille and Italy and Greece and Croatia. So I did a deal with her and said, look, you carry on with me and I'll get you home as quickly as I possibly can. And well, that didn't really happen because we took 2 years to get to Portugal. But yes, I'm doing my best.
Very good. And do you see a difference between obviously the sailing around the Canal du Midi and then obviously Spanish waters? Any tips?
Well, to be fair, the Canal du Midi, we turned the vessel into a canal boat. I had to take the mast off because the many of the bridges on the Canal du Midi are only 3 and a bit meters high, and there's no way I can get a 20-meter mast under those things.
Or in fact, most of the trees over the Canal du Midi.
Well, yes, you're right. Yeah, but at one time you were allowed to take a mast on board down the canals, but the year before I went, they put the mockers on that because, particularly for a boat my size, I mean, we're 42 feet, which is 12 and a half meters. And the mast sticks out 2.5 meters from the sharp end and the blunt end. And trying to maneuver the boat without the mast on was quite tricky, particularly when you've got a lock with water thundering through it, swinging the boat all over the shop, and to actually manipulate the mast as well with having that knocking into other people or smashing itself on the sides, the concrete sides of the locks would have been disastrous. So I was very pleased that the French decided we could not take it down there.
Fair enough. And so I suppose it was a bit plainer sailing when you got into Spanish waters then, by the sounds of it.
The Mediterranean obviously has very little tide, so that was one thing we didn't have to worry about. The currents are only half a knot, and they sort of wobble about, but half a knot's not too bad. It's when you're going through the Needles Channel and it goes from sort of 3 up to 6 or 7. Yeah. That's when it starts to get hairy, which we've done many times, obviously. But no, Mediterranean sailing is very pleasant, can be.
Very good. Any tips for any of our listeners, anywhere they should be stopping off on their way more than anything?
Oh, well, to be fair, the book does have maps in it showing you where we stopped off. And there are the Punic coast of Spain is composed of huge ports for containers and oil, like Cartagena, Tarragona, and a couple of others. Tiny little fishing places, which won't allow a large 12.5-meter boat in, and leisure places for yachties like myself where it's available, and etc. If you wanted to get some tips about that, well, I've got a couple of tips for you. The first one is that you really need to make sure of several things. One, you have a pilot book.
Yep.
Because you don't know where your destination is, whether it will accept you or not. The second thing, a certain amount of very basic Spanish, like please and thank you, and where is the toilet and things like that. And can I come and stay tonight? And the other thing is a mobile phone.
Yes.
Everything works on mobile phones in both Spain and France these days. All of our boats have got VHF radios and things like that, but they all do it on a mobile phone. And the best and the cleverest thing to do is to phone up the day before and say, look, would you mind? I'm coming along. I'm 42 foot. I'm English or British, whichever way you want to put it. Could I stay for a night or two in your beautiful marina?
Yeah.
Whereupon the very nice Spanish lassie goes, oh, of course you may. What is the name of your boat? Da, 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 da. Have you got all your paperwork? Yes, I have. And life is so simple. And then that really showed the value of it when we were going to the Cabo de Gato. There's a place there called San Jose.
Yeah.
And it's right, the Cabo de Gato is the corner of Spain where Spain changes from a sort of northeasterly to a southerly. It's basically the start of the Algarve, where everybody goes on holiday. But that means that the water screws around that somewhat rotten and can be quite dangerous, particularly with the wind. So anyway, I did exactly what I've just advised everybody else to do. I phoned them up and spoke a little Spanish and asked if I could have a berth. Whereupon they said, oh, yes, you can. So the next day we set off and we got there about 3:00. And as I was pulling into the port, this Belgian boat came out. And I sort of waved at him and he went, and he grumped at me in Belgian. So I thought, oh, that's a bit unusual. Most foreign yachties are very pleasant to each other. And anyway, I pulled into the only berth available in the whole place.
Ah, you nicked his berth.
There you go. So I registered to the Capitainery, and it was a very fine young lassie. And I said, what's the matter with that Belgian guy? And she laughed her head off. She said, she said, he came in here at 10:00 this morning. He hadn't booked. He tied himself up and he wouldn't leave and he wouldn't speak at all, except in Flemish.
Right.
And I said, well, how did you, what did you do? He said, well, he wouldn't understand Spanish. He refused. We don't speak English. And so we had to send someone into the tourist part to find somebody who might speak English and might be able to understand his French, because his French was so heavily accented. Yeah. Anyway, there was a 3-way conversation whereby they basically told him to go away, which he really didn't like. And just as I pulled into the port, smiling happily, and of course he was most upset.
Oh, well, perfect timing for you, not so great for him.
No, if he'd been a little more polite, and if he'd actually tried to speak in Spanish, I'm sure they would have accommodated him. But they were so fed up with him, they just kicked him out.
No, it makes perfect sense. You've obviously written 2 books now. I mean, what was it that sort of prompted you to put pen to paper in the first place?
Oh, that's a question and a half. I've always liked writing, and in my professional life, I was known as the person who could get a nice email together. Now, that may not sound as being damned with faint praise a bit, but I could explain things and sometimes make it quite jocular. Bear in mind, I was brought up with Dennis Norden and Frank Muir Ronnie Barker, P.G. Wodehouse, and John le Carré, who, while he's not amusing, has an amazing ability to put a sentence on paper such that you can understand it and get the sense of place and the sense of menace, etc. So that's basically my education. And all I tried to do was use words the way those gentlemen used words and to try to make it entertaining, because
Fantastic.
That's what I like to do.
Well, that's wonderful. And I mean, you say in your book that you got sort of into boating later in life the most. How did that come about? You know, what was your first foray into boating?
Oh, well, I blame my wife for this. I was a scout leader for 20 years.
Amazing.
And one of my hobbies was I was a mountain leader in Snowdonia since I was about 30, I suppose. And I carried that on for, as I said, for quite a long time. And then I suddenly realized that my knees and my ankles were starting to give up. And they changed the law about mountain leadership certification. And it required me to spend several £1,000s to get recertified. I was running a company at the time. I was running a scout troop. And I just couldn't be bothered.
No.
And I didn't feel it right that I should have to pay that amount of money to take young children safely up the mountains.
Quite.
By the way, I never lost one.
Well, that's a feat in itself.
Yes, it got a bit close at times, but I managed to bring them all back, which is good. So anyway, my wife got a bit fed up with me grumping about the house. And so she said, well, why don't I book us a holiday in the Ionian on a week's charter thing?
Yeah.
So we did, and I took to it like a duck to water. I mean, I had sailed before, but many, many years before, when I was about 17, 18, 19. And I really enjoyed it, and she really enjoyed it, and we worked it well and decided I started to get my day skipper and my yachtmaster course, yachtmaster theory. And we started to enjoy ourselves. And eventually we came up to the conclusion of, well, why are we spending £6,000 or £7,000 every summer when we could actually put it into our own boat? Absolutely. So that was the next stage.
Well, and clearly it's been a bit of a life-changing decision, because you've now written 2 books, experienced all these adventures, and never look back.
It's been absolutely wonderful exploring, because we started off in Lymington in about 2016 or 17. Yeah. We came all through Brittany. I did a project on the submarine pens of the Second World War, which gave me a focus to go into all of these wonderful places like Brest, and I can't remember all of the others, but Port-Louis, everywhere where the Nazis built a submarine pen, I have been in and looked at them.
Wow, incredible!
I know it was really good. And one of the things we found out was, I don't remember. You're not old enough, but I am, to be told that after the Second World War, the Pathé newsreels were talking to us about the bombs that the Lancasters carried, and they were ones that would go through and destroy the U-boat pens, and how successful we all were with Tallboy, I think it was called, invented by Barnes Wallis, and how successful they were. And, the Germans would have real trouble with their U-boat pens. Well, of course, when you go to see them, there's absolutely no damage at all. So you think, hang on, wait a minute, weren't you supposed to be destroyed? And basically the German concrete was just fantastic. They very cleverly built a false roof on all of their pens. I don't know if you've seen them, but that's what they did. Right. So some of the false roofs fallen down, but no damage to the submarine pens at all. They carried on in fact, the French Navy used them up until about 1950 odd to store their nuclear submarines and their diesel submarines during the Cold War.
Gosh, that's incredible. That is incredible.
I know, just amazing.
Worth a trip then, by the sounds of it.
Well, I haven't written that book, you see. So,
well, my last question was going to be, is there a third book in you? But I feel like we've just had a spoiler.
Yes, but by the time I finish writing it, you'll have forgotten, so that's all right.
Possibly.
But no, there's at least one, if not several, in there.
Fantastic.
in my head.
And outside of boating and writing about your adventures, of course, you're an exploration geophysicist on seismic exploration. Now, clearly, I'm repeating something written down on a page. And so for the ignorant of us, can you tell us what an exploration geophysicist does?
I can try to. To be fair, I'm a mostly retired exploration geophysicist, mainly because the oil industry collapsed in 2015.
Yeah.
That's obviously when the price of oil went from 100 down to 25 or 28. But never mind. An exploration geophysicist, I'm the upstream part of the oil industry.
Yep.
I'm the guy who designs the seismic survey, either land or marine. I then try and get someone to shoot the seismic survey. So I go and find a company. I will then go down onto the crew or onto the ship and make sure they're doing it properly.
Yep.
And then when the data has been recorded, I will take it to a processing center where it will be turned into a cube of information. In fact, these days, many cubes of information, such that the next guy in the train, who will be the interpreter, he'll put that on his workstation and he'll look at it and say, aha, we should be drilling here.
Amazing.
So I'm basically a service to an oil company.
That's fantastic. And I guess it's taken you all over the world. I mean, where's your fondest memory or favorite place that you've had to visit?
Well, I have been doing this for 46 years now, so I've been to quite a few strange places. I'm afraid that when God was designing the planet, he put all of our oil in the crappiest parts of it.
Excellent.
If there's a marsh or there's some hot weather or some cold weather, he puts the oil underneath it. So, for instance, I was in China, and China was not what China is now.
Right.
Back in the early 2000s, it was a very pleasant place to be. They were very keen to have us along, and they were just fantastic people when I was there. But being in China in minus 30 degrees was a bit of a challenge. Up near the desert beginning with an M, Mongolian desert. No, the Gobi Desert. That's the one, beginning with a G. Yes, I was up there in minus 30, and minus 30 is pretty dang cold,
Pretty damn cold. And how long do you have to go on site for something like that?
Well, it depends. Sometimes I used to do it in 2-week stretches, depending on how long the crew is going to be there. But the other place I've actually been to the planet Tatooine in Star Wars.
Very good. Presumably not the actual planet, but rather the set.
Well, it's where they filmed the planet Tatooine, which is the eastern sand sea of Algeria and particularly in Tunisia. I've been there. I've been to the Sinai, where the Israelis and the Egyptians fought several wars, and we helped them, of course. Also, the Palestinian war was fought over that piece of ground. It's quite amusing making explosions and taking trucks through minefields, because there are so many mines there left over from the various assorted wars. We were pulling stuff out from 1917 that had been buried there all that time. And of course, it was very unstable.
Completely.
So,
yeah, amusing is probably one way to describe it. Well, harrowing might be the other.
Well, that was when I was but a young man. I mean, it was back in the 80s. And obviously that's still there. But it was for a young man of 25 or 26
that's quite
to go. It was quite exciting, but one wrong move and bang, off you went. Yeah. And I was the explosives expert there, by the way, so I had to be even more careful.
You were the one having to prod all the mines and see what they were doing.
No, I wasn't the mine clearance chappie. We got a guy from an ex-Vietnam vet to come and do that. Wow. No, I was the one who made the explosions that we designed to go off. But you're always conscious that if there was a mine there, you'd get a simultaneous explosion. And if it was a big mine, instead of a sort of boof, there'd be an almighty whomp, and your truck would go flying.
Miles down the road, fair enough.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's only so much firing line you can put out.
Well, no, completely. And I mean, I guess, you've been to all of these fantastic places. You've had a whole bunch of adventures throughout your career. Do you think that had some role to play in you deciding to take up boating and to, chart the untrodden path with your adventures on Dofesaba?
Yes, I've had adventure all my life. I
Yeah.
mean, climbing mountains is adventurous. Shooting seismic is always adventurous. Going round Africa, which I did as well, and particularly a place, I don't know if you know, it's Takoradi in Ghana, which is absolutely wonderful. I mean, I just love that part of the world. And the people the Ghanaians are just wonderful folk, tell you. But anyway, yes, I believe that it tuned me to want to do exciting things. And if you're not fulfilling yourself and not doing exciting things, the best thing you can do is read about them. So there you go.
Quite right. Especially in these particular times that we're living in.
Yes. Well, I haven't done much exciting recently, I tell you.
Well, there'll be a book in that in itself. So, I mean, what does boating mean to you then? I mean, I guess it is an extension of the excitement of the rest of your life. But, what role does it play in your life day to day?
Well, it's quite scientific. You need meteorology, you need navigation skills, you need communication skills, particularly if you're going through France and Spain. I mean, you're talking to all sorts of folk. There's all sorts of bars where you have to really struggle to order a beer if you don't know the language. Yeah. You also need to be able to manage the feeding of your crew and yourself while you're doing that. You need to be able to interpret the sea a little bit, such that you don't put yourself and your wife in danger.
Quite right.
Which is, and that's one of the things that the boat is designed for, of course. The boat is perfectly capable of surviving all sorts of things. It's the human beings inside it that are the soft, squashy bits that get hurt.
Quite true. Perfect. And I suppose, in between work and writing and sailing, clearly, you're a father of 4. You've participated in circuit training and yoga and cycling. You're an active member of the Royal Leamington Yacht Club. How on earth are you fitting it all in?
Well, I do it carefully, to be honest. Yoga, the cycling, etc. That's to keep me fit and healthy while we're doing nothing, if you see what I mean. It's very easy to be locked in your own little house and not do anything, or read books, watch television, drink beer all day, whatever. And that sort of keeps me fit and healthy. You asked what was most important.
Yeah.
Well, for instance, this year, I know it may sound fatuous, but this coming year, we are expecting our first grandchild, and nothing to do with me. And it will interrupt our sailing season. And I have been told that we will be traveling to Singapore to see it when it arrives.
Wow.
And that's obviously my main priority for my 4 children. Sounds fatuous, but it has to be true.
No, completely. And I think, 99% of our listeners will probably sympathise exactly with you.
Well, I hope so.
Quite right.
Yeah. But you mentioned the Royal Leamington.
Yeah.
We moved to Leamington for several reasons. One, we were both getting older, and let us hope we continue to do that.
Sure.
And when we had pulled into Leamington on our travels, it was a thriving town. It was very beautiful. There were lots of people there that seemed very similar to ourselves, sort of basically mature. And it had a lovely high street.
Yes, it does.
With lots of little bijou shops and shopettes and things. And it had the New Forest next door for cycling in and going for walks, etc. Anyway, so we moved here, and that was good. We joined the Royal Leamington, and that was good too. We tried to become part of that. My wife is the chair of the social subcommittee, and I am currently the editor of the weekly newsletter. I told you I like words.
Well, I was going to say, who else could it possibly be?
Yes. You like words and you like telling stories. You're the newsletter editor. Oh, anyway, so of course, now in COVID times, we're not allowed to use the club.
No.
The many pubs around are closed. The high street's practically closed. I mean, I think Tesco's is open, Marks is open, and I don't know, Smith's, and that's about it.
Yeah.
The market's hardly anybody comes to the market. So it's not fulfilling the promise that it had when we visited the first time round.
Oh,
To be
interesting.
fair, we did check loads of other places along the south coast
Of course.
where you could store a boat, and we decided on Lymington.
Well, I mean, it's a lovely part of the world, and I think, in lockdown, there are worse places to be with the New Forest right on the doorstep and the water just there.
Yes, but unfortunately, the southwesterly wind blows lots of drizzle and dreich. The Scots would say dreich.
Absolutely.
But it just comes up, and we've had about 4 weeks of it until this latest sunny period, and it's just been, how can I put it, miserable. Yes.
Yeah. So are you rethinking Lymington? I mean, is there a move on the cards?
No, I don't think so. No. Well, moving costs money. We don't have vast amount of it, but and what little we do have spare tends to go on the boat.
Well,
and I'm afraid that's going to be reduced now we've got a possible grandchild. So who knows? Who knows?
We'll see what happens. I mean, I think what we saw last year, especially when we had the sort of initial easing of restrictions, was people getting out on the water anyway, which they can, whether that's through paddle boarding or, chartering a boat, or, obviously boat sales have gone through the roof over the last 12 months. So we're definitely seeing a wave of activity around boating and a wave of interest around it. Have you got any tips for anyone that's looking to get into boating later on in life?
Yes, I would do exactly the same as I did, which is go to 3 years worth of boat shows. Both Southampton and London were available to me at the time.
Yep.
I think London's pretty close now, but go and have a look at all of these boats. Go sailing on a charter holiday or two where you get to see some boats and see what they're like.
Yep.
And do a lot of research. As I said, I spent 3 years and lots of time on the internet trying to work out which boat was best. I came to the conclusion that the southerly vessels were by far the best because, A, they were very solidly built.
Yep.
They have a fantastic ratio of righting moment. So when they go over, they come back up again.
Always a nice thing.
It's a very cunning thing to do, actually. Otherwise, one tends to get a bit wet.
Quite right.
They have a ballast ratio. That's the word I was looking for. They have a tremendous ballast ratio. They're solid. As I said to you earlier, the only bits that get damaged are the soft folk inside, which is us, of course. The boat's more than happy. And we've had it out several times in a Force 8. The boat didn't bat an eyelid. We hung on for grim death and eventually got through it. So, and I just felt so safe inside it. Makes a big difference if you've got a wife or passengers or anything like that. The next point I would point out, oh yes, of course, the lifting keel means you don't have to worry about the depth you're going into because you just sit there and let the tide go out and there you are, high and dry. And that saved us many, many times. And while I can calculate tidal heights and depths and where the water's going to go, it's a lot easier when you don't have to have a 1 or 2 meter wide as you come towards the shore.
Quite
we
right.
have hit the odd rock, the odd uncharted rock. It makes a hell of a din. It's a massive clunk. The keel comes up and goes back down again, and then on you go. That's it.
Well, I mean, that's the perfect test of the sturdiness of a southerly, isn't it?
Well, yes, but if you did that in a proper boat without a lifting keel, you'd have to go and check the keel bolts. Absolutely. You'd have to make sure the underside hadn't been cracked, and that can be very expensive, which is why people with keels don't do that.
No.
But, you never know. I hit an uncharted rock in Brittany, and that's what I said. It was a massive bang. But the other things you must remember is that it is very easy to underestimate the costings.
Right.
You do need to make really sure that you've got sufficient to keep it for the 10 years, however you want to do it. And the cost of repairs keeps going up.
It does. And as boats get more and more complicated, that will probably only be the case.
The electronics, they do go out of fashion and they do get old, and you need to replace them every now and then. Then you've got the rigging, which is worth 10 years.
Yep.
And then you've got the sails, which last 10 years. And, all of that starts to build up. I mean, my rigging cost 10 grand to replace. The sales are going to be another 10 to 15.
It is a costly thing, but once you've caught the bug, I suppose it's hard to lose it.
Well, look, it used to be what people did for their retirement. It was called living the dream.
Yeah.
There are many people in our yacht club, and I've met overseas that are older than I am, and I am now 66, 67, that, bought into that living the dream. But there are very few people younger than me wanting to do that. So it looks like I'm right on the cusp of those folk who thought that boating was living the dream, mainly because I suspect that 2008 got rid of quite a few pensions and things like that. People are now starting to think more about motorhomes, which are a lot more cost effective, if you like, nowhere near as much fun, but we see so many motorhomes all down the French Canal and the east coast of Spain and the south coast of Spain, of course.
Yeah, well, I suppose that makes sense. It does make sense. And I guess, there are obviously emerging alternative ways of sort of having that boating lifestyle without the initial or sort of massively ongoing commitments, things through boat share clubs and schemes. Did you ever anticipate or think about those options, or was it always for you to have your own boat?
I looked at boat sharing, but I couldn't find any of my friends who had sufficient will, sufficient cash, or had retired at the age I did, which I think I was 62 when I was forced to retire. And they weren't ready to do it. And I wasn't going to get into bed, if you see what I mean, with some unknown folk. Oh, no. And in the end, Mary and I decided we would just bite the bullet, buy our boat, look after it, waste all our money on it, and
live a happy life,
Yes. Well, it's been a massive adventure. We've just had so much fun. We've been to many bars and restaurants and places of interest and museums and churches. And that's what the book's all about. It's got, whenever we go somewhere, I always check the archaeology out. And you wouldn't believe how many Phoenician, Roman, Greek, or the Iberian places there are up along that east coast. And not so much the south coast, but certainly the east coast, the Punic Coast. Incredible. Just fantastic things. There are whole Roman theatres still there that have been recently excavated. Oh, gosh. Tarragona. Yep. There's a Circus Maximus they've just found about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. They found one end of it. It's right next to the Roman theatre that's right in the middle of Tarragona. Yeah. Empurias is a whole Roman town that they've only just started. They've done the Greek-Roman bit, so when the Romans were still a republic, and when they became after Antony, they decided to move the town to the top of the hill. And they've only just realised that this huge hill is one massive Roman city.
That's amazing. Amazing.
It is. It's just, you have to read all about it.
These are the things that will be enriching your life that you've found out because you've been on a boat. So,
correct.
There's a sell for you.
Just happened to be cruising down the coast. Let's try there. Oh, gosh. It really is. That's basically what has been happening in 2019. Yeah. 2020 was a whole different ballgame.
No, of course.
It really was. There was no one there.
No.
We were one of the very few boats going across the west coast and down to Gibraltar and then on to Portugal. We saw very few boats indeed. Yeah. We went into quite a few marinas where we were the only boat.
Wow.
Seriously.
God.
The bars were all closed. Everybody wears a mask in Spain, and they were doing it back in July, August, September of last year, while the Brits were still arguing about it. All the Spaniards said, no, mask, everybody, you're not coming in here without a mask. And there was none of this, oh, excuse me, would you mind putting your mask on? No, you, out, put mask on. And
wow. Well, it's the way to be, I suppose. They've got it under control, haven't they? So
they did indeed. One thing we did meet, which you might be interested in, was did you hear about the killer whales around the Tarifa?
No.
It was a big deal in about July, August. Somebody saw a news report about killer whales off Tarifa bothering yachts. So they sent me a newspaper clipping of it as a WhatsApp.
Yep.
And so when we left to go through Tarifa, we very carefully made sure that we were out of where the tuna nets are, which is where the killer whales go, obviously, for food. And we pulled into Barbata, and we were the second boat to arrive. And a young lady came off the other one, and she said, it's nice to see you. She said, are you all right? We went, yeah, that should be. She said, oh, no, we've been here a week because the killer whales bit our rudder off.
Oh, my goodness.
and she proceeded to tell us all about this. And what had happened was they left, they were on a yacht delivery cruise, and they stocked up with everything. They were off to Helsinki from Gibraltar.
Wow.
And as they went through Tarifa, so they'd only been gone. They'd only left, 6 hours, 7 hours.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, these killer whales took hold of their rudder in their teeth and swung them around several times. They then munched on the rudder.
Good.
And made the boat disabled. So, of course, they were absolutely terrified, as you can probably imagine.
No, completely.
And they couldn't steer the vessel. And the skipper he was quite an experienced guy, he did his best, tried to steer with the sails. But every time he did that, they started nudging him and pushing the boat over. Mm-hmm. So eventually he called out the local lifeboat, who towed him into Barbata,
right,
wrecking his pulpit in the process.
Oh.
And so he then set about trying to get himself repaired. Mm. Well, unfortunately, Barbata does not have a crane capable of lifting a 40-odd foot boat out of the water.
Oh, my goodness.
He would have to go to Cadiz or back to Gibraltar.
Yeah.
In the meantime, this young lady was saying, there were several other boats coming in, several British, making their way to Gibraltar.
Yep.
Lots of white-faced women who had also been knocked about, bitten about, but they weren't in as bad a shape as this Oryx boat, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it made the news. I read about it when I got back in England. I read about it on the web when I was out there. Anyway, these poor folk, they didn't know what to do.
Oh, so you were, it sounds like you had a pretty lucky escape then, not to be chowed on.
Yes, it comes down to skippering, if you like.
Yeah.
You know that the whales live out there.
Yeah.
So if you take the inside passage, and that's where the netting, that's where all the tuna's caught. So if you take the inside passage, the whales are unlikely to come past into the 10-metre zone. Now, 10-metre zone for me is no problem at all, obviously.
No.
And not for most yachties, to be honest, but it's not as exciting and it doesn't look like blue water cruising, but it's a lot safer.
Well, there you go. There's a tip right there for anyone listening.
Well, that's right.
Unless you want to end up in a whale's stomach. Well, look, what are your plans for this summer? If we get the summer that we're all hoping for, any sort of boating plans?
We have already booked our flights for the end of May.
Fine.
And that is our plan. My plan was originally the beginning of May, because we're going up the west coast of Portugal this year.
Amazing.
And the winds are very favourable May, June. After June, they start to come from the north. So I'd be heading directly into wind, which is not that comfortable.
No.
It's not impossible, but it's not as enjoyable.
Yep.
And it is supposed to be a holiday. I sell it to my crew as a holiday. She's getting a bit wiser these days.
No, quite right. She's going to do her own investigations and then you'll be slaughtered.
We're doing a fast passage up the west coast to the rears of Spain, which is northwest Spain.
Great.
Because I want to go to Santiago de Compostela.
Uh-huh.
And and the boat's designed for the rears of Spain. We can dry out in some of them. And there's some beautiful national parks there,
yep.
Which are just fantastic to visit. And it's designed as a tourist area as well.
Fantastic.
So there'll be bars and there'll be restaurants and there'll be things to see, and which is what we do.
Hopefully all of it will be open and it'll all be a lovely update for the last 6 months.
Well, I'm desperately praying that the Portuguese government suddenly goes, wouldn't it be a good idea to let the tourists in?
Yeah.
Because at the moment, we can't land in Portugal.
No, well, no.
It's closed.
Well, hopefully the next few months, a bit of sunshine will lift everyone's spirits and lift some restrictions at the same time.
That would be cool.
That would be very nice. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time today, Peter. I think, lots of our listeners, if they haven't already, will be going out to purchase a book. Anywhere they should be looking, widely available?
It is definitely available on Author House and Amazon.
Perfect.
Basically, and there's also a Kindle version.
Wonderful.
You just put into your search engine The Adventures of Dofesaba II and it will come up. Or you could email me directly at pbell@cgsltd.co.uk and I will sign it for you and send it to you.
Well, even better. There you are. If anyone's listening,
I will write what you like inside the foreword. You have a signed original first edition copy.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think you'll be getting inundated. So I hope you don't mind writing. But thank you so much and good luck to your adventures for the rest of the year.
Oh, thank you very much, Dominic. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, it sounds like Peter's had some incredible adventures on Dofesaba II. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Folktales and that you join us for the next episode soon.